What is up, Maniacs? I am Zach, and I am the Milly Maker Maniac. Welcome to our game-by-game breakdown episode for Week 6. If this is your first time watching the channel, I'll give you a quick overview about what we are about to do. I create this spreadsheet every week, which takes PFF's grades, and I take them against their opponent, so we can see some matchup advantages and disadvantages. And then we go in and we start looking at the pricing for them for the main slate on DraftKings and start working towards getting our player pool put together. But we're looking for opportunities that look like a good spot for the week that we can really focus on certain offenses and certain players in our player pool. So let's go ahead and get it started. Also, if you are interested in getting a copy of the spreadsheet, I am happy to share it with you for free. You can just shoot me an email at millymakermaniac@gmail.com, and I will get that over to you. Happy to share the wealth. Want one of y'all maniacs to take down that Milly. Obviously, I got dibs on it this week. Y'all can get second, but I'll give it up in Week 7 if I can take it down this week. All right, my friends, let's jump into it. Our first game we got is the Baltimore Ravens versus the Los Angeles Rams. This looks like a massive disadvantage for the Ravens, a huge advantage for the Rams, pretty much across the board. We can see that besides the pass block versus pass rush for the Rams, that they have positive advantages all the way across the board, that and besides special teams. But everywhere besides that, they look like they are dominant in the passing game and dominant in the running game as well in this matchup. So obviously, this jumps out as a spot to be on Rams. The nice thing about the Rams is it is pretty concentrated. We know that it's Kyren Williams, Puka Nacua, and Devontae Adams. Obviously, Puka would be the first in that list as far as most likely to have a top 5 week in and week out. He has been putting up big numbers. Pricing this week is going to be a little difficult. We'll look at that here in a second. My biggest concern, honestly, is if Lamar doesn't play, I could see this being like a blowout early. So it doesn't feel like it's one of those games where Stafford's really going to push to get over that 300 and some, and like 300 plus passing yards and 3+ touchdowns. Like that's really what we need from Stafford to be a top 5 QB and one that we want to have in our lineup. If it's more of a managed game with this huge advantage in the run game, I could see them just running Kyren. And then I think if they have, a 3-touchdown lead in the fourth quarter, we could see a lot more Blake Corum. So I do have concerns about the volume that the studs will be getting because this advantage is so big. Just crazy to think like we have 7.5 point favorite against Baltimore in Baltimore. If we were looking at that going into the year, we would say that that's just insanity, but that's where we're at with all the injuries on Baltimore. Their defense is just awful. We look over here at their actual grades. We can see a lot of neutral and a lot of red on their defensive grades here. And then the Rams are just best in the league pretty much everywhere except at their pass blocking grade. But that's been covered up by their exceptional passing grade and their receiving grade. And they've actually run block very well. It's interesting to see that spread between the two. But overall, big advantage for the Rams here. It's more of just like the game environment for me. Like, do I believe that the Rams here will score enough fantasy points? Like, if they get 4 touchdowns, but it's all in the first half, like if Stafford throws for 203, that really doesn't do it for us. Kyren, I think, is probably the player that'll have the most out of this game because of his price at 6,300. He's put up some big weeks recently too. Yeah, 32 against the 49ers. Has had a little bit of a fumbling issue, so hopefully that doesn't slow down his volume at all. But he's been a lot more efficient this year too, and been getting into the passing game. Had 8 receptions in that game against 49ers last week. So Kyren, I think, is the best play out of this. Corum, like, there are some game scenarios where he gets in and gets a TD or whatever, but that's not enough. Like, we're looking for guys that can be top 5. Kyren, I believe, is that guy, especially if Baltimore finds a way to keep this competitive. The matchup advantage is awesome. So, like, we would hope for this game to be where it's a little bit back and forth. So they're pushing still. I don't really think that's going to be the case. So I probably want to be I'm not going to be as heavy on the Rams as it looks like the matchup advantage would indicate that I should be, just because I think it'll be somewhat like the Lions last week. Like the Lions kept pushing, but if all of that volume doesn't go to like the guys we need it, and last week for the Lions, I went to Montgomery and I went to Laporta. Those were the guys that like scored enough to do anything. And with our builds last week, that really didn't do us any good because we had better running backs and we had better tight ends in our player pool. So the Lions that went off, even though they scored 30 plus points, it wasn't enough in DFS to do anything. I'm concerned that could be that scenario that could be the scenario this week for the Rams as well. But the nicer thing about the Rams compared to the Lions, as I talk myself out of this a little bit, is they are a lot more concentrated than the Lions. The Lions have like roughly 6 mouths to feed, where the Rams pretty much have 3. It's pretty much going to be Puka, Devontae, and Kyren. So because of that, you could see even if they do have like a blowout type scenario, that at least one of them is still top 5 at their position. So I'll probably build somewhere in the ballpark of 5 to 8 Stafford lineups. Obviously easy to stack. Just do single stacks with Puka or a double stack with Devontae, or we can throw Kyren +1 or +2 of them. Actually, we could do both receivers plus Kyren. We want to do like an onslaught. That's something we could definitely build. So we'll build 5 to 8 with Stafford, but primarily it'll be Kyren, Devontae, and I'll try to get to as much Puka as possible, even without Stafford. The thing about this price that we have to be wary of, generally speaking, I only play guys at this price with their quarterback. This is such a good matchup, and Puka's getting such elite volume that it's like 25 is pretty much his floor. At 25, if he only gets 25 points, he's going to be a bad play at 8,700. And the reason I say that is like pretty much every week we can go look back and look at last week's results. There's generally going to be 4 or 5 guys above 25 pretty much every week. And at the salaries, like Jamar Chase was the high-end guy that went off last week, and JSN was towards the top as well. But at this price, we can be a lot more aggressive at getting those guys in there, and that 35-point value has a lot more value. Jalen Waddle at 26 is much more valuable when he's at 5,400 than a 25 from Puka when he's 8,700, because makes so much harder to build our lineup, so much harder to go get those other fantasy points because he's that high. For him to be, if he was on this slate at 8,700, we would really need him to score like 38-ish points for him to be somebody that we had to have, just because there's other guys. There's going to be 3 or 4 other guys in this range that are going to be a lot cheaper, allowing us to get to other points over here. So I'm very wary about going real heavy on guys that are very expensive. The guys that you can't miss on are the cheap guys that go off. Like if you didn't have Rico last week, you really couldn't compete for the Milly Maker. That's what we're trying to go after. So we can fade it sometimes when expensive guys go off, because there'll be other guys in the same range of points that are much cheaper that allow us to get to like the Jonathan Taylors and such, the other value plays that put up big points. But if you miss on the Rico Dowdle, you're hosed, right? You have to have the cheap guy that goes off. So that's something to just be aware of each week when we're going through this. Pricing wise, like Devontae will be able to get to. Puka obviously harder at that 8,700 that we just talked about. Kyron's more middle of the pack when we look at all the running backs. Looks like he's roughly running back 10 in pricing. So to me, that looks like a sweet spot. I'll probably be fading the top 3 guys, even though Taylor and McCaffrey look like smash spots, especially Taylor. I'll still get to him a little bit, but at 85, it just has to be such a big game for him to be needed. Like if he's RB3 at that price, we shouldn't have been playing him at all, right? And that's the same thing with McCaffrey. Like yes, they're very likely to finish top 5, but if they're only like RB3, there's 2 guys that are down here that are cheaper that we needed. Like those are the guys that we're going to want to go after, have more volume of in our lineups, a higher ownership percentage of those, because everybody's going to be on these guys. And if they just have an okay day, like those lineups are kind of dead. They have to have a day that is so exceptional to everybody else in order for them to be needed. So even their outlier performances might not be good plays. So that's something to be aware of when you're looking at salary and how you're building your lineups. We want to be more mid to lower tier that has that upside to get up here, rather than being really heavy on the super expensive guys that have to hit so hard in order to be required. Like, they can still be in winning lineups and not like hit super hard, but it's much harder to build those lineups. So yeah, something to consider there. On the Ravens side, it looks like Lamar is going to be out. I don't know if Cooper Rush or Huntley is going to start, but I don't really want any piece of any part of this. Henry, it's just been tough in the game script. Really tough matchup here. There's just nothing I want to touch here. I think that this is just a bad spot for them. We'll see what the pricing is for the Rams D, 3,500. Yeah, it's going to be a little bit harder to get to, but I could see them getting a pick 6 or so as well. All right, so in this game, we like the core pieces for the Rams. We're fading the Ravens. We'll mix in the Rams D a little bit. Let's move on to another game that I think is going to be more exciting, actually, for DFS purposes. That is the Cowboys against the Panthers. Now, we scroll over here and we look at the matchup advantages. We see actually a pretty solid matchup advantage for Carolina's offense. That's because the Cowboys' defense is horrifically bad. So that works really well, though, when Dallas's offense is very good. That leads to a lot of shootouts. So this is another opportunity for one of those potential shootouts, a lot of fantasy points scored. The biggest advantage for the Panthers here is actually in the run game. If Chuba is out again this week, Dowdle will be one of our highest owned running backs for sure. We will build some Bryce Young stacks. Advantages everywhere in the passing game except for pass blocking versus pass rush, but that's actually a pretty neutral disadvantage there. Like, that's pretty middle of the pack. You see down here we have like some real big disadvantages in pass blocking versus pass rush with Pittsburgh and Cleveland and Cincinnati. So minus 10.8 isn't a huge disadvantage. So not too worried about that. So yeah, Panthers look good. We'll check out pricing here in a little bit. And Dallas is going to look good every single week. They have a really bad pass blocking grade, but it doesn't seem to matter because they've had a big disadvantage every single week, and it doesn't seem to impact Dak's ability to be a top tier QB week in and week out for fantasy purposes, and they got a solid advantage in the run game. So these are two offenses that have just solid advantages across the board. Two of our highest overall scores, where we take the QB gradings, the running back grades, the whether they're home or away, and their point totals and all that. I have a little grading system for that. But two of the top ranked offenses to attack this week in the same game. So this is one that I will definitely do a good chunk of game stacking. I will also build plenty of lineups with just the Cowboys offense and plenty of lineups with just the Panthers offense, just in case only one of these offenses go off. But this feels like one of those games that can be back and forth and could create a lot of juicy fantasy outcomes for us. Let's go ahead and look at pricing now that we've gone over the matchup advantages. So Dak at 6,500, definitely third highest or really second highest priced on the slate, but still, like, that's a reasonable price despite being up towards the top. Go to running back, Javonte at 6,400. Yeah, love that. Derek Brown for the Panthers has really been playing well. So their run defense has actually been much, much better than it was last year. But Dallas has just been running the ball at will. And if they're passing the ball as well as they have been as well, like, they're going to have to probably shift towards coverage, which could open up some stuff for Javonte like it has in pretty much every week. We were all over Javonte last week. He got a 29 spot. Yeah, I mean, I think 20 is more of his floor right now, which is crazy to think, crazy to say coming into the year. But yeah, he looks good. They're running the ball, they're moving the ball well, and they're, just have to go up and down the field because their defense can't stop anybody. So I like going after Cowboys week in and week out. I think CD's still going to be out this week. Let's see if we've heard anything. Nothing new. We'll keep an eye on that. If he's playing this week, definitely would have interest in him at 7,500. He'd be one of my smash plays for sure. We got Pickens at 6,800. We'll be all over that again. Flournoy came out of nowhere. wasn't on my radar at all. I was all over Tolbert last week. It's pretty much my go-to every single week is to be on the right offense where the secondary receiver that nobody's thinking about is going to go off, but have the wrong one. I had Tolbert. He did nothing the previous week. I was all over Mooney, but also that week I was all over DJ Moore, but then that week it was Odunze, or not Odunze, whoever their third receiver is. It's eluding me right now. And then I missed on Trey Tucker when I was all over Devontae Thornton too. So anyways, rant over on just missing the wide receiver that we need. Flournoy, if Lamb isn't playing, I think has to be in play again. Had 9 targets last week at 3,600. He definitely is a very solid punt play. Tight end, Jake Ferguson, they're getting his price finally right, but he's just been so solid. He was tight end 2 last week. He was our highest roster tight end, so we hit on that. Not touching either of these defenses, so these guys will all be in my core player pool. I'll be playing tons of Cowboys like I have been every single week, and they have been some of my best performing teams are those Cowboy teams. Now on the Panthers side, Bryce Young is way too cheap, so he might be one of our core plays this week. Probably in the ballpark of 8 to 10 lineups for Bryce Young. Let's look at his production. Hasn't really done anything except for week 2, but he's just been moving the ball better. Yeah. Against Dallas, though, there's more upside. Tetero McMillan's got to have a breakout game eventually. Let's see if there's any update on Chuba. Wasn't sounding like he was going to play this week. We'll see. If he's not playing, I like Dowdle a lot. If he is playing, it's a bummer. Makes it hard to get to either of these guys with the split backfield. But we'll see. We'll see how it plays out. Tetero McMillan at 6K definitely will be in our player pool. Leggett came back off the hamstring injury and showed a little something, got a TD, made another nice catch on the sideline. He could be in play a little bit. If Coker's back, I'd have some interest in that for sure. The window is opened up, so he might be back this next week. We definitely have some interest in him. Doesn't sound like Sanders will be back yet. It sounds like it's going to be a while before he gets back. So Trimble didn't do anything last week after coming off 15. Probably not too much interest there. Primarily Tet and Dowdle will be the guys that we'll be looking at here if Chuba's not playing. But like this game, I think it has a decent chance of going off. So this will be one that we target both offenses separately, and we'll build a good chunk of game stacks as well. Let's move on to our next game. We got the Arizona Cardinals and the Indianapolis Colts. This one, it looks like a big advantage for the Colts across the board. Colts are just a good team. They have one of the highest total grades for me this week. So I like the Colts to win. They're at home as well. Looks like a solid Jonathan Taylor game. Looks like a solid Daniel Jones game. Pretty much I'm just going to attack this offense every week. The core pieces of that are going to be Jonathan Taylor, Tyler Warren, and Michael Pittman. And then obviously Daniel Jones as well. Josh Downs, we saw a little something from last week, so we could mix him in a little bit. We'll see if Alex Pierce is back as well. Now, everything looks bad for Arizona here. Negative across the board on their matchups here. Run game, pass game, it all looks bad. That being said, they're coming off a really bad loss. Nobody's playing Kyler this week. It seems like these are the random spots where Kyler goes off. So I'm going to build probably 5 Kyler lineups. They're easy to build because it's either single stacks with McBride or Harrison or the double stack with both of them. Besides that, I'm not touching anybody else on that offense. I probably won't spread Harrison or McBride across any of my lineups that don't include Murray. But I am going to build some Murray lineups just in case he has that random pop week that he tends to have when it doesn't make any sense. This is indoors too. We'll see with the foot injury if he's playing or if he's ready to just go play Call of Duty. That's definitely a possibility too. So if I play Kyler, it's not because it has nothing to do with confidence. It's just that he does have those random spike weeks. And if I want to get on board with one of those when they hit, especially when the field's not going to be on it. So we'll play 5 of those just in case. I'm not going to touch these running backs, even though they're cheap. I don't want to play against Indy's defense. I just don't believe in their run game in general. Yeah, Marv at 53 is definitely interesting. Not playing anybody else. McBride at 55 is okay. But yeah, I'll primarily just be on the Indy side of this. When I do play the Arizona side, it'll probably just all be Murray stacks, just a few of them. Daniel Jones at 6K, definitely a pretty attractive price. This opponent rank does not reflect what we're seeing on the matchup grades, so that could work to our advantage with some lower ownership. Jonathan Taylor's a stud, but if he gets 30 this week at 85, like as long as somebody else is along with him, like Rico and like Ja'Cory Krosky and Javonte, like if this plays out the same, like if this were the same this week as it was last week, Jonathan Taylor was not a good play in that scenario because he is too expensive. The other guys are much cheaper, allowed us to get to the higher price receivers that we needed, as well as tight ends, even though the QBs weren't that expensive. So I like Jonathan Taylor. I think there's a very good chance that he finishes in this top 5, but if he finishes RB3 or RB4 at that price point, he was the incorrect click. So it's just tough when you're clicking a guy and he has to be RB1 and RB1 by a good chunk for him to be somebody that I'm going to have like as a super high ownership rate. Obviously, he's very good and has a good chance of being RB1, probably the best chance of anybody this week. But he has to do it at such a high level, at such a big number for it to be something that we have to have, that it's okay to fade this a little bit. Obviously, I'm not going to fade it completely. I'll probably be somewhere around 10% Jonathan Taylor lineups, just in case he does have that massive outlier. I'm going to be, way behind the field on that if he does have that crazy outlier. But I'll still take my chances on building those lineups better than the rest of the field. But I'm not going to have a ton of him just because of that price. It's all relative, right? You can be RB3 and still be the wrong choice. It's important to understand that. Pittman at 5,400, though, that's a price that we can get behind. He's scored in 4 out of 5 weeks. He's getting consistent volume, consistent yardage. And if I think there's going to be games where I think they're going to kind of be like the Lions, where there's like some weeks where Goff randomly goes off and all the receivers come along with him. There's going to be other weeks where the running backs go off and none of the receivers really do much at all. So I'm going to play both sides of that. It's much easier this week to play it as a Daniel Jones big passing game week where we could do single stacks with Pittman and with Warren, or double stack with both of those guys. That is a really nice line and a super awesome matchup advantage, right? Like, look at this, like across the board, one of the best matchups. So to me, this just indicates that they're going to be able to move the ball up and down the field however they choose to do so. So in games like this, you're probably going to have pretty decent yardage both for the running backs and for the wide receivers. Then it just comes down to when they're in the red zone, who gets the TDs. That's what decides who is a good fantasy play as far as DFS goes, like somebody that's top 5 and somebody that just is decent, like top 15. Top 15 in the Milly Maker doesn't really do us any good. We need top 5 or better. And all that's going to come down to is really who the ball goes to in the red zone. Some weeks it's going to be Jonathan Taylor, like it was last week where he smashed and had 3 touchdowns. There's going to be weeks where Pittman gets 2 TDs. There's going to be weeks where Warren gets 2 TDs, right? There's going to be weeks where Daniel Jones throws a touchdown pass to Jonathan Taylor, right? So they're going to score points, and there's a lot of different ways that those points can be distributed. We're going to play a lot of different scenarios with the Colts players being the player that is the 1 or the 2 players that you need out of this game. I'm very confident that at least 1 Colt will be top 5 at their position. More than likely 2 will be. So it's a matter of like mixing and matching our combinations of that. And hopefully we have a good chunk of lineups that have the 2 correct guys that we need out of this lineup, out of this game, I mean. All right, I think that's enough on the Colts. Definitely interested in their defense as well. Let's look at the pricing on that over here. 3,300 is where they were last week. We had a good chunk of them on our defense last week, and they were, I think, defense number 2, if I remember right. Let's look over here. Yeah, defense number 2. Obviously, the Saints were the ones that we wanted to have. They were super cheap and the highest scoring, but the Colts were solid at 3,300 as well, just 1 point behind the Saints. All right. Moving on to our next game. Battle of two would seem like playoff locks right now that I don't think people would have thought coming into the season. But the Seattle Seahawks and the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jacksonville Jaguars coming off a big win on Monday Night Football against the Kansas City Chiefs to get them to 4-1. And they looked really solid in all facets of the game. This looks like a pretty neutral advantage for both sides. We have a little bit more of a slight advantage on the Seattle offensive side, where just solid advantages at every spot except for pass rush, but really that's one of the better scores of the week. Pass block versus pass rush, and then a little bit in the run game as far as run blocking versus run D. But beyond that, solid advantage everywhere else. Nothing spectacular, but we're going to want to build Darnold stacks every single week. We had a few Darnold to JSN to Barner stacks last week, which was the nut stack that you were going with for a quarterback. And we had a couple of them, but we had way too many lines and way too many Chargers in those lineups. Unfortunately, that was our big miss for those two offenses. The philosophy was correct. We just missed on how those two games played out with the Lions and the Chargers. We weren't necessarily wrong on the Lions. It was just distributed in a way that didn't help us. And then on the Chargers, we were just wrong on that one. It was just a weird game flow. But that's besides the point. Seattle this week, I think, has a better situation than they had last week against Tampa. Jacksonville's D's been solid, but they're not unbeatable by any means. So let's go over here and look at pricing. And then actually real quick, Jacksonville, just pretty solid here. Nothing too crazy. A little bit of a disadvantage in the run game, a little bit of an advantage in the pass game, but pretty neutral. They haven't had any boom games yet on offense, really any guys that you've needed to have, but they did make some progress this week. So let's look at Seattle first. Sam Darnold at 5,400. Yeah, we'll probably be building 10 or so Darnold lineups this week at that price. Kenneth Walker, these guys are hard to get to just because the backfield is so split. Like, he had a good week, 8.6 yards per carry, but only 10 carries. That's not going to do us anything in fantasy. You can be good in the NFL, but not necessarily good in fantasy. And right now, that's the case for these two guys. Charbonnet seems to be getting the goal line work more too. So that's killing Walker's upside. So when they're both healthy right now, I'm going to fade them week in and week out. There's going to be some random weeks where Walker gets that big game, like by busting a 60-yarder, but I think it's going to be hard for him to have like a 30-point game when Charbonnet's in there, because he would have to bust like 2 or 3 of those to get the yardage and the touchdowns needed to get to that really big boom game. I think he'll mix in some like random 20-point games, which are nice, but they're not going to win us a Milly Maker. So because of that, I'm not going to play these guys while they're both healthy. JSN, his price is finally getting more reasonable to where it should be, but it's still at 7,600. It's low enough that he'll be more of my go-to play this week than Puka. Puka's going to be more highly owned, but the salary savings of 1,100 here, to me, makes JSN a lot more popular, or a lot more desirable, a better play in DFS, more likely to be somebody like his 30, makes a much bigger difference than if Puka gets 30, with that $1,100 difference in their salary. And I think really right now his floor is this 20-point game. And at 7,600, a 20-point game doesn't kill us. It definitely is. We're definitely hoping for more than that. But we could have a 20-point game from our 7,600 wide receiver and still have a lineup that hits everything else perfect and give us a chance to win the Millie. So to me, he's more intriguing than Puka this week. I'll definitely have a higher percentage of JSN than Puka. To me, Torrey Horton is more intriguing than Cooper Kupp just because of how they're being used. He has that chance of getting the longer TD than Kupp does, but hasn't had any real big weeks. 18 would be usable at 4,100 for sure. He can be a decent punt play. Cup, we can see it's just like he's playing good NFL football right now. He's key for them, helping move the chains, but that doesn't help us in fantasy. He's got to score 2 touchdowns to be usable right now, and I just think that's very unlikely. Barner had a big week last week. We had him in a couple of our lineups with Darnold. He's been pretty solid. We'll definitely mix him into our player pool. So my favorite stack would be just Darnold with just JSN. And then my second favorite stack would be Darnold with JSN and Barner, which obviously was the nut stack last week. Could be again this week. Go to Jacksonville. Trevor Lawrence, very cheap, 5,100. Last night he showed a little something in fantasy. I didn't realize there was a 28-point game. Moved the ball on the ground really well. Had quite a few good scrambles. That's definitely intriguing. I think everybody's freaking out about Jacksonville's offense. They were all expecting a lot more with Liam Cohen there. I think people just need to chill out and be patient. Like, you can see there's still, even in the game last night, you can see there's still a little bit of confusion. Like, his offense is complicated, has a lot of layers to it. It involves a lot of movement. And you can see the guys are still just getting comfortable, but week in and week out, it's getting a little bit better every single week. It feels like guys are starting to see the light and buy into it a little bit more. I believe in Liam Cohen as a play caller, and I think he's having the right approach to it. So I think start stacking these. It's going to make sense to start stacking Jacksonville players. Yeah, we haven't seen the game from Thomas yet. He's so cheap at 6,200 now, though, and he looked a lot better last night. It's 4 for 80. Pretty solid. Let's see. Hunter, I know, had a decent game. Looked a lot better. I thought he went down. Let's see how he's. That doesn't say anything about him being hurt, so we'll keep an eye on that. Saw him limp off at one point. Diami didn't do anything. I know Parker Washington had a TD. So right now, their targets really they're not turning into fantasy points. Like, see how Strange did. I know he got hurt last night too. We'll keep an eye on that. Did Long get So it must have just been the running backs that he was passing to. Or were they all just rushing touchdowns? Interesting. It's an interesting when you get a 28 spot and he only had one passing touchdown. That was to Washington. And he ran one in. Oh, he ran 2 in. That makes sense. Okay. So 2 rushing touchdowns. That's how we get to the 28. But all that being said, sorry, I went on a little bit of a journey there. I just think that Lawrence to Thomas there's going to be a week where that's the stack you have to have. This very well could be that week. I like the Lawrence to Thomas stack with the bring back of JSN. I could see that happening. We can mix in a little bit of Hunter as well. Like, he's such an explosive dude. Like, even in those 3 receptions he had yesterday, like, you can just see, like, there's an element to he is just different. They haven't quite figured it out yet with him being both on defense and offense. But again, like, I think it's just patience with all this stuff. Like, they're going to continue to get him the ball at 4,700. We can mix that in. There's going to be a game that he's going to bust 1 or 2. Like, he's just an electric athlete, and I think that he is going to start having some big games at some point in the season. And I think as the season goes on, Jacksonville is going to win people the Milly Maker a couple times this year. I want to be early to that party. I think I'm getting closer to, I'll probably build around 10 Lawrence lineups this week. It allows us to get to a lot. That stack is so cheap. We can also mix in, like, it's hard because they're splitting pretty evenly right now, but you can mix in a little Etienne and a little Tootin into those stacks. I'll primarily just go to Thomas, though, and a little Hunter. I just don't see De'Ami Brown. I mean, there may be a little bit. It's hard to visualize a 25-point game from him. We see down here, we do have a 5 for 57 and a TD, but we need that, like, boom game potential. Thomas is the one that's got that more than anybody. We'll keep an eye on Seattle. I know Witherspoon was out last week. If he's out again this week, that is definitely more favorable towards Jacksonville as well. Go back to the grades real quick just to refresh. Yeah, Jacksonville, so pretty neutral here. See how their offensive grades are coming along. Yeah, overall, average to above average across the board, both on offense and defense. I mean, that's a big part of why they're uh, above, or they're 4-1 right now. Seattle really solid everywhere except pass blocking and tackling. It's interesting, a very low tackling grade and a pretty low coverage grade. So those two things that set up for a random spike week for sure. I think both of those came down quite a bit because of the game they just had, where Baker just went off against them. It is in Jacksonville as well. Yeah, this is a sneaky game. I'll build some game stacks here. I'll have a good amount of stacks with both quarterbacks. Those are cheap stacks, allowing us to get to some other games. All right, let's move on to our next game. The Los Angeles Chargers, who broke our hearts in week 6, versus the Miami Dolphins, who look like they suck. Looks like they suck very badly. Is their run blocking, their run offense versus run defense looks like a massive disadvantage for Miami. It's going to be very tough for them to run the ball, which is going to make it easier for this Chargers defense to just key in on the pass. And with this bad pass blocking offense, that is all just tough for Miami. Probably won't be going after anything on Miami this week. Obviously, Waddle had a solid week. We'll see what his pricing is when we go over there in a little bit. Maybe we'll have a little interest there, and maybe Achane can get there on volume. But it's tough to see. This week, the Chargers have just a massive advantage across the board, except in pass block, but it's pretty neutral in the pass block, which is what killed them last week, and then just kind of weird game flow killed them last week. I want to look at last week and see how big their disadvantage was. I did change the coloring system. Hopefully this is easier on your eyes. I watched my last video. I was like, oh, wow, that's tough to look at. So I know this is brutal now, but I did change the formatting this week. Let's see, where are the Chargers? So, yeah, they had a much bigger disadvantage in the pass block versus pass rush last week. Pretty similar advantages in the pass game. So I'm going to go right back there. I'm not going to be scared. Herbert will probably be my highest roster quarterback again this week, even though he broke my heart last week. Yeah, I think one or two of those receivers are going to be top 5 this week, especially with it looking like Hampton's going to be out. Like, they have a huge advantage in the run game, but like, do we really think Vidal, or who's their other guy that they have right now? Haskins. Yeah, like, these guys, they don't. I just don't see it. I don't. Watching them play last week, they both just look slow to me. No explosion. Like, yes, if they have the big run blocking advantage, they could sneak in a few. But it's hard. It's probably going to be pretty split. He had 5 carries. He had 4. What I saw of them wasn't impressed with. I'll look back at both of those guys, watching some film. The spot is really great, but if it's going to be mixed and matched between these two with the big advantage in the pass game, to me, it's just like, look at that value. 5,600, 5,700, 5,900. That's where I want to go back to. Like, just these 3 guys spread across my lineups, and I think 1 or 2 of them has a big game. Is the biggest advantage run game versus the run defense, but their run blocking versus run defense is about neutral. Let's see where their run blocking. Yeah, they're very good. They have really good run scores, but their run blocking is actually very bad. So to me, this score is skewed because of Amari and Hampton, because he's been running really well. They're grading that. That's the primary. Oh, that's also the other thing I'm not thinking about is Herbert's rushing grade is definitely pulling this way up because he's been scrambling really well. So that advantage, although it looks like a big number on here when we put it in context, makes a lot more sense here. So, yeah, I see advantage for Herbert in the run game a lot more than I see it for Vidal and Haskins. So give me Chargers passing game. That's where we are this week. I know we were there in week 5, and us maniacs know that bit us in the ass and it fucking sucks. Trust me, on how much it sucks. They killed me. Then the Lions destroyed me last week. But that's okay. This week in week 6, we believe in Herbert. We believe in Harbaugh being able to make the adjustments and get us to where we need to be with these guys. So, yeah, Herbert at 6,300. fifth highest guy this week. We can handle that. I'm not going to touch these guys. I'm just not going to do it, even though they're 5K in a really good matchup against Miami. I just think it's too split. I don't see, like, if we put Rico Dowdle on this team at 5K, yeah, all day, every day. But split between two guys, to me, this is a lot like the Michael Carter and DeMarcado situation last week. Like, they're just going to split it. So one guy, even if like a guy has a decent day, it's not going to be a huge day. And we need a huge day to win the Milly Maker. We need 25 plus points from the running back, from all of our running backs to really have a shot at winning it. I just don't see those guys getting to 25 points. These guys, I see getting to 25, maybe one of them getting to 30. I'm going right back to it. McConkey, we were close on last week, got the punt return called back, and then they just really didn't get the ball in the second half. They didn't get any 2-minute drill stuff. Just the flow of the game just really killed the upside that was there last week. Disley was out again. Conklin had a big mental mistake that cost him late. Wasn't in the huddle on a 4th down as the play clock was running down. So I don't really want to mess with any of these tight ends right now. Just the wide receivers. These 3 guys plus Herbert. That's how we're playing the Chargers. Defense, Chargers at 3,400. We'll definitely have to mix in there. Now let's look at the Miami side. Tua 5,500. Achan 7,800. Waddle at 6,100. I think I'm going to have to pass. Waller 4K is a little interesting. At 18 points last week, 5 targets. Looked really good, honestly. Waller might be the only piece that I pluck out of here. I'll build 3 Tua lineups. That's it. I'm just going to play this as the Chargers dominate this game, and they dominate through the passing game early. They give us what we wanted last week, but they do it a week later, but we're not giving up on it. I'm getting 15 Herbert lineups for sure. Our next game is ugly. This is Pittsburgh and Cleveland. Pretty much don't want anything from this game except maybe Quinson Judkins. And the defenses, massive advantage in the pass rush versus pass blocking on both sides. Should be a tough day for quarterbacks. It looks like it should be a really tough day on the ground. But I think that, let's look at the matchup, if it's good on good or bad on bad. Pittsburgh's run defense, pretty good. They're a good tackling team as well. And then Cleveland's run blocking towards the bottom for sure. But Quinshon Judkins is just different, and I feel like they're going to feed him the ball like crazy. So let's jump over to this game. Let's see where he's at 5,900. Really, he's had 3 games where he's been the guy. His lowest there has been 16.5, all on negative game scripts as well. Scored in 2 of them. Last week out 100 yards, but didn't get the TD. To me, this is a much better. Let's look at Minnesota's score against the run last week before. I think they have a bye this week, but let's go back to last week. See where Minnesota is. They run the early game. Minnesota, yeah, they're middle of the pack. Run D, so a little bit better than what we're looking at for Pittsburgh. Well, Pittsburgh's actually slightly better, but I don't know. I just feel like this game is going to be pretty slow paced, and that Judkins is just going to get all of the work. The Steelers D had given up some pretty big games early in the season. Week 1 against the Jets. And then they gave up some big spots to New England as well. So to me, this isn't as bad as a matchup as the Grays are looking for Cleveland's run game. I want nothing to do with Pittsburgh's offense. But I think Judkins will have to be in the core plays at his price at 5,900. I think he is one of the more likely guys to get 25 points this week, 100 yards and a TD, and we're pretty much there. That doesn't seem out of the realm of possibilities when you know he's going to get the majority of the work. I think their goal this year is to win as many 13 to 10 games as they can. That is their one win on the season against the Packers. So they're going to run the ball and they're going to play defense and try to get turnovers. And I think that they have a good chance of doing that again this week against Pittsburgh. So let's look at the pricing for these defenses. Oh, yeah, Cleveland. Cleveland is the smash spot for sure. That is probably going to be defense number one on the week for me when we look at just how bad this looks for Pittsburgh's offense. Just bad numbers across the board, like dark red too, with the gradient on it. Great suggestion from somebody last week on the in the comments. I appreciate that, but put the gradient color scale on there to make it easier to see where they're at. But yeah, this is one of the biggest disadvantages across all levels of their offense. Like that just looks like Cleveland D. That looks like a lot of turnovers, a lot of sacks, and very few points scored. That looks like a good fantasy offense. And going against that, you would think that they would be running the ball a lot on the offensive side to slow the game down and just keep the offense on the field as much as possible. So give me Judkins. Judkins and Cleveland's D. That is going to be one of my go-to stacks this week. Nothing else out of this game. I don't want any other piece out of this game. Nothing. Zero. Zilch. No QB lineups out of this nothing QBs. Just Judkins and the Cleveland defense. All right, let's move on to our next game. Kind of a sneaky little game here, I think, is New England and New Orleans. I like the New England side, primarily the Drake May side. Drake May plus Diggs, Drake May plus Henry, and maybe a couple double stacks with those guys, and that's it. That's all I got to do. You don't have to overcomplicate it. We're not going to try to figure out this running back room. It's too spread out. They got three guys with a disadvantage this week, but they got three guys. Eventually, Henderson will have a big play. Hopefully, that's a pass play from May, and it's not one big play is not enough to put together a 25-point day. So because of his limited volume, we're just going to shy away from it. But let's look at May. Let's look at those stacks. New Orleans, I'm going to continue to avoid. I'll probably build one or two Rattler lineups, but don't love it. May at 5,900, too cheap. Didn't have a big fantasy week last week, but had a great NFL day. But these 23, 26, like those are, I think, more of his norm with his rushing floor that he brings. And then it's been pretty concentrated targets as well. Like, let's go over here. Well, let's quickly look at the running back room. Ramondre, decent week, but fumbled again. Travion, 6 carries, did nothing. Gibson is out, so it does concentrate it a little bit more. That is something to consider, actually. But it just doesn't feels like they're going to stick with Ramondre. 7 carries, 6 carries. And they don't. It's not like they have an advantage in this matchup either. New Orleans got a pretty good run defense. That defense has actually been playing pretty well. But a receiver, this is what we like to see. It's getting concentrated. Come on, load up here. There we go. There's Stephon Diggs. I was like, that's Ramondre. But had a 27-point game against Buffalo, but 12 targets. Look at the target volume just gone up. 3, 7, 12. 3, 6, 10 on the receptions. Yardage is going up. Like, seems like they're both feeling more comfortable. Feels like we can feel more comfortable going to that stack. And then Henry as well. Didn't get as much volume this week as we'd expect. Come down quite a bit from week 3. See if Hooper's getting any. Nothing. So it looks like, let's see where Booty was. 3 targets each week. We can't really do anything with that. Douglas isn't getting anything. Kyle Williams getting anything. All right, so yeah, it's Diggs and Henry, but primarily Diggs. We'll probably build 10 Drake May lineups this week. Some naked, primarily with Diggs. Some with Henry, and then a couple double stacks with both of them. But that's really the only way that we'll be building it out. I'm going to avoid this running back room, I think, this week. Look at the grades again. Yeah, they're negative in both run block versus run D, and then just the run grade versus run D. Negative in both. Feels more like a Drake May spot in a dome in New Orleans. New Orleans runs a lot of plays, so fast-paced offense. Let's go. We'll look at their side. Just make sure we're doing our due diligence and not fading them completely. Backfield's been split, so it's kind of hard to get to either of these guys now. 10 carries for Keandre last week, 8 carries and 6 targets for Alvin. He's the one that makes more sense to get to, but at 5,700, I think there's just better options there. Wide receiver, Chris Olave, really good in redraft, irrelevant in DFS. 12 points does mean nothing. I don't want this. I want touchdowns and 100-plus yard games. He's pretty much going to get you 60 every week. Doesn't feel like he's getting that big game. So Shaheed has more upside. Obviously, he had the big game last week, but basically one fluke play. So it's hard to go to that week in and week out. And then with Taysom Hill being back, makes it hard to get to Juwan Johnson as well. So I'll build 1 or 2 Rattler lineups just because, but beyond that, not touching it. Not going to have them in any of my other lineups. Let's move on to our next game. We got Las Vegas versus the Tennessee Titans. Tennessee coming off the most improbable win I think I've ever seen. This is by far the best matchup Tennessee's had all year. I don't think I have interest, though. What did Cam Ward end up putting up fantasy-wise? Yeah, 9 points. I just don't trust Callahan at all, even in a better spot. Pollard is now splitting with Spears, so we're never going to get there. Ridley had a decent week last week. He lives. Hadn't seen much of him. Much better matchup this week. So we can consider it. Nothing too exciting there. Shake do anything? 5 targets, yeah. I mean, much better matchup for him this week. I think it's going to be a pretty ugly game, really. I might build my first 2 Cam Ward lineups of the year, but probably nothing else as far as being in any of my other lineups. Gino has sucked so far, but if there was gonna be a good week, it would be this week. So we'll mix it in a little bit, but very, very little. Maybe 2 lineups. See what Bowers does. Hopefully they take their time with him and let him get healthy. To me, this looks like a Genty spot. Like, he's all they got. They haven't had he had a 37.5 point game against Chicago, which was by far their best matchup. This week against Indy was a much worse matchup for him, especially with Colton Miller out. But he's so explosive. He still just made some stuff happen despite getting basically no blocking. And this week, they actually have a slight advantage in the run game. They haven't had that all year. We go over here and we look at their run blocking grade. Yeah, towards the bottom. Just getting a little bit better, actually. Their run grade's pretty solid. But Tennessee, their run defense is just bad. Tackling's pretty bad. Their defense is just pretty bad besides pass rush, which is basically Max Crosby. So, to me, out of this game, I'll build a couple stacks with the quarterback just for my just-in-case ones, but don't really believe in anything coming out of these games, so won't play anybody besides Genty out of these games. This next one is interesting to me. We got San Francisco and Tampa Bay. Sorry, let's go back over here, look at pricing. So it's sounding like it's going to be Mac Jones. Last I heard, Purdy was likely out for a while. So probably going back to Mac. Had 2 solid weeks, especially at his price point. 5,600, not as sexy as he was previously, but still very much in play. Obviously, McCaffrey, solid every single week. But these weeks, he was a bad play. I know that sounds stupid because he put up 28 points. But in week 5, he wasn't on the main slate, so he's not going to pop up on this. But at 8,500, he would have been running back 5. That's all of those guys are cheaper than him. So he was the incorrect play. Most weeks, I think he's going to be towards top 5 because of the volume he's getting in the passing game. But that does not make him a good play because of his price. So I'm going to be fading him again this week. I'll mix him in here and there when the salary just like opens up based on how the lineup I've built. But when I don't have that, I believe that there will be 4 people that score higher than him this week, and that will be cheaper than him, therefore making him a bad play. Hopefully they get Pearsall back. If they do, he will definitely be somebody that I will want to play a lot this week. We'll keep an eye on that. Kendrick Bourne, if he's out, is definitely intriguing. Seemed to be the guy for Mac Jones last week. Juwan Jennings, we'll see. Yeah, obviously they're beat up. We have a lot to figure out on who's playing for them. So we'll want to build stacks with this lineup. We just don't know who it is yet. George might be back this week too. Saying not. Looking like it's looking like they're waiting until week 7. That sucks. So, yeah, we'll have to a lot of wait and see here. I will want to target San Francisco. And then on Tampa Bay, we weren't as heavy on Tampa Bay as we should have been last week. The matchup looked really bad, but we still built 5 Baker lineups. We do that regardless of matchup every week because when Baker goes off, he brings people along with him. And we saw that with Egbuka. And we had a few Baker, Egbuka, and JSN lineups. We just had, once again, too many Lions and Chargers in those lineups that killed us, which was a bummer because we were on it. We just weren't on it with the right peeps, but that's all right. So Egbuka 7,200. He's a lot more in that ballpark with JSN, where I'm going to have more Egbuka than I'm going to have Puka this week because their price is more reasonable, still more expensive, still on the higher end, but we can get there. Chris Godwin looked a little better this week to me. We might be able to start mixing him in. Kate Otten got a little bit of work as well. Sorry, my Wi-Fi is struggling apparently. He finally showed up a little bit this week with 5 targets. 3,400, we can mix him into some of our Baker lineups. We'll find out about Bucky later in the week. Let's see what the matchup looks like here. Over here in the run game, we're actually showing basically pretty neutral. Pretty neutral. So we could play either guy. If Bucky's out, we could play a little bit of Rachaad White. If Bucky's playing, we could play Bucky as well. So primarily Baker to Egbuka across the board. Let's wait and see on San Francisco and see who's going to be in. Depending on who's in, we'll want one of these receivers. We'll want some Mac Jones. It's just going to be a matter of who's playing. Right. If Pearsall plays, he's definitely the go-to guy, the guy you want. If he doesn't and Jennings doesn't, we like Bourne. If Jennings plays, if Pearsall and Jennings both play, Jennings would be the second guy I'd want, but would want both of them pretty equally, honestly. But we'll just have to see how that plays out throughout the week. But I do have interest in getting to San Francisco. It's just going to be very dependent on who they play or who is able to play. All right, let's go down to our last game on the main slate, Cincinnati and Green Bay. This looks horrific for Cincinnati. A massive, massive, massive disadvantage in every single spot except for their pass rush versus the pass blocking of Green Bay. That's basically the Trey Hendrickson effect. Beyond that, they are just trash across the board. So it's similar to like the situation last week with the Lions in Cincinnati. Like, I like it here because you get concentrated with the running back who has a pretty big advantage here. So we can just get to our Josh Jacob teams. Let's see. He's towards the top, but he is below that main tier. Yeah. So like he'll be I like Jacobs at 7,300 better than all these guys. I think that I'm not saying necessarily that he's more likely to outscore these guys, but where they're priced, if they score the same, which I think is a very likely scenario, then Jacobs is the guy you want. If Jacobs scores more, then that means that these guys were bad picks. And I think there's a very good chance of that occurring. So Jacobs, Genty, they'll be probably my two highest owned running backs this week. Yeah, I just feel like they're the better values with good matchups. And I think that Green Bay is probably going to learn from how that Cleveland game went. It felt like they got a little lackadaisical there and let that one slip away. I think they're going to keep the gas on the pedal early and at least into the second half if they get out to a big lead. Their defense has a big pass rush advantage, but not a huge in like everything else as far as the pass game. The coverage isn't that great. So we could see another scenario where we saw like we did last week where the Bengals sucked, but they actually did decent from a fantasy standpoint. Like Browning ended up with a decent day because they're just throwing up prayers and they got answered by Jamar Chase a few times. Yeah, Jamar Chase was like a gross 32. Like it's he didn't have a game worthy of 32 points. It just happened that he played well, of course, but they were so out of it that Detroit dominated that game a lot more than what the score showed. So, but that can still happen. That's another outcome that could occur this week. They're cheaper. Chase and Higgins are both cheaper there. Don't really want to get to Gesicki, and Chase Brown still just doing nothing. And this is like their worst. This is even worse than the Detroit matchup was for them last week. I think there'll be weeks where it'll make sense to get back on the Bengals, but I just don't think that this is that week. So we'll do like we did last week and build one or two Browning lineups. And that'll pretty much be it on Chase for us. Obviously, that did end up burning us, but it was a weird run out. Again, that could occur again where they're so far behind and they just throw some up to Chase, but I don't know. It feels more likely that they're just going to like quit on the game to me. I think Zach Taylor is very much on his way out. In Cincinnati, I think they're going to be trading Hendrickson here soon. So just bad energy there. And, Jamar and T. Higgins are elite athletes, but it's hard to overcome this with when you don't have the Joe Burrow effect making up for all of these crazy bad grades. It just puts you in a real tough spot. Now, with the Packers side, this game is kind of hard to stack from the Packers side because Love's price is fine at 62. Jacobs, we know, obviously, that's where all the volume's going. It'll probably just be the running back click for us that will be on this week. Dobbs obviously had the big game in week 4. They're coming off a bye. He had the 30-point game then. He seems like the most solid as far as like being on the field the most. We've seen Matthew Golden getting more looks. This could be his breakout game. Watson might be back this week. He's been designated for return. We'll keep an eye and see if he plays. That would throw a wrench into some things. Wicks is getting some targets. This could be a random Wicks game, honestly, against the Bengals, so we'll mix him into a player pool a little bit. Kraft is really where we can have some confidence. He was hurt a little bit in both of these games. Didn't look the same. But coming off of the bye, we expect him to be closer to normal. So I think that works to his advantage quite a bit. So I would really build the majority of my stacks around Kraft, and then I'll build some stacks with Love here, mix it and matching with these receivers. I'll also build some, Love, Jacobs, Kraft lineups where, Kraft scores 2, Jacobs scores 1, and then Love throws one other random touchdown to one of the other receivers, but that receiver doesn't do enough to be like needed. So that's a type of game flow I could see, 100 yards and a touchdown for Jacobs seems really nice. Kraft getting a couple touchdowns seems like a pretty good possibility. So that Jacobs Kraft stack I will have across a lot of lineups without Love. I'll build that stack with Love, and then I'll also mix in Dubs and Golden as well. All right, my friends, let's go ahead and build a lineup here. Our first one of the week. A quarterback, I'm going to go back to the man that hurt us last week. Don't hurt me again, Mr. Herbert. Please don't hurt me. We're going back to QJ. He's going to have a big week. We're just going to do a little single stack here. We're going to open it up at wide receiver. We're going to go JSN. We're going to go Egbuka. Two guys that obviously went off last week, but I think that they are likely to do it. We're not chasing here. I think this is just recognizing superstars at good values that are likely to do it week in and week out. At running back, let's see if we can get to the guys that I like the most here with Jacobs and Genty. And can we? No, I think we're running out of salary quick. We're being a little high end here. Let's see. Let's get our defense in there. Want to go. There it is. We want the Browns at 2,500 against Pittsburgh. What are we going to do here at tight end? We got to get cheap. We're going to have to give up somewhere. Let's, man, I really do feel like it's going to be more of a Tampa Bay week, especially with Nick Bosa out. Jacksonville's played better defense. Let's go. Let's take JSN out of this, and we'll go find some volume or value here at wide receiver. Brian Thomas is intriguing. McMillan is intriguing. We do want to get a little bit of that Dallas stack in here, maybe. Let's try Tetaroa, McMillan, and see if we can get to Ferguson. Can we get to... Yeah, it's tough. We're going to have to go lower than that. So let's see if we can get Kraft in there. 3,200. So early in the week, don't really have a feel for where all this value is going to come from. So that's part of building these lineups. You get a better feel for it as you're going through it. I don't think there's really anybody in here that we're going to want. We're going to want. So we're going to have to remove somebody here. Let's get cheaper at receiver again. Actually, let's bring Egbuka back. We'll go back with Egbuka. 7,200. Let's see what we can find at running back. Love to get Kyron, definitely somebody we're interested in. Javonte, somebody we're interested in. Dowdle, definitely interested in. Let's get Javonte in there. That still only leaves us 3,700. Yeah, we have to work through some stuff. Get a better feel for this slate on where we can get some value. Right now, we're just too top heavy. The 3,700. I don't think there's going to be anybody we want to punt with at that range, except maybe I did just think of Flournoy. I think he was at 3,600. Let's throw. It's a bit of a stretch. 3,600. He had the 20-point game last week. Yeah, we'll go with that for now. So we got Dallas stack against that Carolina, so a little bit of a game stack there. And then we got Jacobs and Kraft. Really like that stack and a big lopsided advantage there. This feels a lot better to me than the Lions even last week because like these two guys are far and away the go-to targets, where on the Lions, like we believed that there would be top 5 guys, and there was one top 5 guy that just happened to be at tight end, and it didn't do us any good because there were tight ends better than him, than Laporta there. So we attacked the Lions. our philosophy was somewhat right, but the points just got distributed across too many of their guys for it to matter for us in DFS. But with the Packers, like, you feel like it's pretty concentrated with these guys of Jacob and Kraft in a really good matchup. If somebody else goes off in that game, like, it's not that crazy to think, but you would think that at least one of these guys is going to be top 5 at their position this week. So we're going to have 1 or 2 of them in pretty much all of our lineups. So I like that a lot. Then we got Ibuka coming off the big week, but coming off the big season so far. He'll probably be pretty highly owned. We might adjust that a little bit throughout the week, but still in a good spot against San Fran. Without Nick Bosa there, that pass rush just isn't getting to anybody. And that sounds like a nice little relief for Baker, who's been incredible against bad matchups the last few weeks, and he finally gets a more neutral matchup this week. So we'll see how that plays out. And then our core stack of Herbert to QJ. We believe in this Chargers passing game. I'm going back to it. Herbert's also got some more work on the ground, been running more this year, and without their top 2 running backs and 2 pretty mediocre backups left that I think are going to split the load, I think it's just going to be a Herbert to his receivers day, and we'll be building that across all of my lineups. And the Browns against Pittsburgh, massive matchup advantage for the Browns here. I think they have a lot of turnovers and maybe have a defensive scoring touchdown this week. So yeah, like this one, we'll play around. We're going to have to find a little bit more value at running back. We'll probably get some more Quinshon Judkins as the week goes on. We'll find out more about Rico Dowdle as the week goes on as well, to try to find ways to get Jacobs plus somebody in here and then take it from there. All right, my friends, good week. Good luck in week 5. Appreciate you tuning in. I'll have my player pool video out later in the week where we really narrow down exactly who we are going to be targeting this week. Hope this was helpful. Good luck in week 5. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you, my friends.